Okay, so imagine you're just, asleep in your apartment.
Right. Totally dead to the world.
Exactly. It's June 1st, 2026. Everything is completely quiet. And then suddenly you hear that distinct, just heavy thwack of a main fuse blowing.
Oh, that is the worst sound.
It really is. And the entire place just goes completely dark. So obviously you call an electrician.
Yeah, because you're not going to mess around with the main panel yourself.
Definitely not. So they arrive, they pry open this main distribution panel, shine a flashlight inside, and within 5 minutes they turn to you and say, "You are sleeping inside a ticking time bomb."
I mean, that just sends chills down my spine. It is the ultimate violation, of that fundamental baseline assumption we all just walk around with. Actively trying to kill us.
Yeah, and that shattering of safety, that's the exact core of the source materials we are unpacking in our deep dive today.
It's a wild ride. We are looking at a fascinating, highly complex collection of AI-generated legal and strategic advisories.
Which is such a unique premise on its own.
It really is. And our protagonist here is a commercial tenant in Germany. He's this high-end lighting designer, and he rents this massive mixed-use space.
Right, so it's not just his home. Part of it is a commercial showroom where the public actually comes in to view his installation.
Exactly. And then the back half serves as his personal apartment. And he's been living and working there, paying rent every single month since April 1st, 2017.
And that date, right, that 9-year timeline, that is a massive factor we are going to have to grapple with when we get into the actual legal mechanics of all this.
Oh, definitely. Because when that electrician opens the panel in 2026, he doesn't just find like a loose wire or a tripped breaker.
No, it's so much worse.
He finds an electrical system that completely defies logic. But, the detail that turns this from a quirky DIY disaster into a high-stakes legal thriller is the identity of the person who actually wired the building.
Right. It wasn't just some random handyman they hired off the street. The landlady's husband, the actual man who personally installed and signed off on this entire electrical system, is a certified master electrician.
An Electromeister in Germany.
Which is a huge deal, right?
It's a massive deal. That title, under German law and in the eyes of the VDE, which is the Association for Electrical, Electronic, and Information Technologies, it carries an immense, almost unshakable burden of professional liability.
So he can't just play dumb.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
He isn't just supposed to know better. He is legally bound to know better.
Which brings us to the central mission of our deep dive today. The tenant takes this horrifying electrical report, feeds it into several advanced AI models, and basically asks for a strategy.
He's looking for a way out, but a very specific way out.
Right. He wants to draft what the documents call a moral offer to the landlady's husband.
And that phrasing is so tricky. A moral offer.
It is. He's trying to figure out how to demand a massive retroactive rent reduction and a complete building renovation. But he has to do it without accidentally committing criminal extortion.
And the distinction between a moral offer and criminal extortion under the German criminal code is, well, it's a razor-thin line.
I can imagine.
You are essentially trying to leverage the very real threat of a criminal trial without ever explicitly making it a transaction.
Like, you can't say, pay me, or I call the cops.
Exactly. But before we get into the psychological warfare of that letter, we have to look at the leverage itself.
Because if you are going to accuse a certified master electrician of deceit, the technical faults can't just be, minor crime violations.
Right. And looking at the June 1st electrician's report, I mean, it reads like a horror novel for building inspectors.
It really does. It's staggering.
To understand the legal ammunition the tenant actually has, we have to understand the physics of what the landlady's husband actually built in that wall.
Okay, let's get into the details of the report. The first major finding. There is an 18 to 24 kilowatt instantaneous water heater running on a 25 amp fuse.
Yeah, that is, well, let's break down the math on that.
Please do, because I know watts and amps measure different things, but how badly mismatched are we talking here?
Okay, to give you an idea, a standard microwave pulls maybe 1,000 watts.
Okay, got it.
This water heater is pulling up to 24,000 watts.
Oh my God.
Right. To safely deliver that much power, the physical copper wiring and the fuse protecting it need to be incredibly robust.
That makes sense.
Usually a unit like this requires at least a 32 amp fuse, and it absolutely must be on its own dedicated circuit.
So it shouldn't be sharing power with anything else.
Exactly. But here, the master electrician put it on a 25-amp fuse, and on top of that, it's sharing that fuse with other parts of the distribution board.
So it's just constantly demanding way more electricity than the safety gateway is designed to even allow.
Way more.
Why wouldn't it just instantly trip the fuse every single time someone turns on the hot water to wash their hands?
Well, because fuses have what's called a thermal trip curve. They don't blow the absolute millisecond, they hit 25.1 amps.
Okay, so they have a little bit of leeway.
Yeah, they allow brief surges. But over time, forcing that much current through an undersized system, it physically degrades the entire line.
It wears it out.
Exactly. And that brings us to the second, much more lethal finding in the report.
More lethal than a 24,000-watt overload.
Unfortunately, yes. The electrician found that up to 3 different cable cross-sections, meaning copper cables of completely different thicknesses, were jammed into a single fuse terminal.
I am honestly stuck on the physical mechanics of this. How does a trained professional even do that?
It's baffling.
What physically happens inside the wall when you mix different cable sizes in one single terminal clamp?
It creates a massive thermal choke point. When you tighten a metal screw clamp down on 3 wires of different sizes, the clamp bites down hard on the thickest wire.
Right, because it's the biggest thing in the gap.
Exactly. But the thinner wires are left slightly loose. They just don't get the same contact pressure.
Okay, I see where this is going.
This creates what electrical engineers call contact resistance. Electricity fundamentally wants a smooth, uninterrupted path.
And when it hits a loose connection?
It has to struggle to bridge those microscopic air gaps.
And when electricity struggles, it generates friction, which means heat.
Intense heat.
Yeah.
And it gets worse. If you have a thick cable and a thin cable tied to the exact same fuse, the fuse is sized to protect the thick cable.
Oh no, so the thin cable is just completely unprotected.
Exactly. The thin cable is now pulling a massive electrical load it was never rated for. It acts exactly like the glowing red heating element inside your toaster.
That is terrifying.
It will overheat, melt its own plastic insulation, and start a smoldering fire right inside the wall.
And the fuse won't trip.
No, because the fuse thinks everything is perfectly fine based on the thick cable's capacity. It will never trip to stop the fire.
That is deeply unsettling. You could literally be sitting in your living room watching TV while your walls are melting from the inside out.
Yeah, it's a silent killer.
But the report doesn't even stop there. It notes there are roughly 20 open, uninsulated cable ends just hanging loose inside the main distribution box.
Just think about the physics of an arc flash.
An arc flash?
Yeah, you have 20 bare copper wires carrying live electrical current, just swaying around in a metal box.
That sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
It is. If a piece of dust, a spider web, or even just a sudden spike in humidity creates a conductive bridge between 2 of those live wires, the electricity will literally jump through the air.
Without even touching.
Yes, it just jumps. That's an arc flash. It creates this burst of plasma that can reach temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun in a fraction of a second.
Are you serious?
I am. If anyone opens that panel door when an arc flash happens, the blast is instantly lethal.
Just from opening a fuse box. But you know, the detail that made me physically wince when I read the materials was the bathroom.
Oh, the bathroom setup is just criminal.
We all know the FI switch, right? The RCD, or residual current device. It's that little switch in your panel with a test button on it.
Right. Its entire purpose is to save your life if electricity ever meets water.
Exactly. And where did the landlady's husband, the master electrician, install this life-saving device? Above the bathroom ceiling.
In a surface-mounted box.
Yes, fed through a lighting track. And you can only reach it if you go get a ladder.
This is where incompetence crosses the line into something much, much darker. An FI switch works by constantly measuring the current going out versus the current coming back.
Right, it monitors the loop.
If even a tiny fraction of an amp goes missing, meaning it's traveling through water, or worse, through a human heart, the switch is designed to break the circuit in milliseconds.
But feeding it through a lighting track first.
It completely neuters the protection. It's all the wiring leading up to that switch, going all the way through the lighting track, is entirely unprotected by the FI.
So if there's a fault there, you're toast.
Exactly. And practically speaking, these switches require manual resetting and, manual testing.
Which you can't do if it's hidden in the ceiling.
Right. If someone is actively being electrocuted in the shower, the person trying to save them cannot be running down the hall to find a stepladder, climbing up into a drap ceiling, and blindly reaching around in the dark to try and cut the power.
Every second counts in that scenario.
It defeats the entire human safety protocol of the device.
And just to wrap a nice little bow on this nightmare, We have to remember the tenant runs a public commercial space, a lighting showroom.
Which changes the legal landscape entirely.
Right. Under German commercial regulations, I think it's called DGUV V3, you are legally mandated to have your electrical systems professionally tested every 4 years.
And no tests had been done in 9 years.
9 years.
When you invite the public into a commercial space, the state takes safety incredibly seriously.
As they should.
Failing to test, combined with these egregious life-threatening installations, it elevates the whole situation from a landlord's quirky DIY fail to severe criminal negligence.
Like actual prison time negligence.
Yes. In Germany, this touches on Baugefährdung, which is the criminal endangerment of construction.
Okay, hold on. Let me just play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
The husband is a master electrician, yes. But isn't it possible he genuinely just made a mistake?
You mean just a standard error?
Yeah. People get lazy. People cut corners on their own properties to save a buck all the time. Why does the tenant's legal strategy automatically assume malicious, calculated deceit just because the guy has a fancy title?
It's a fair question.
It just feels like a massive leap to go straight to fraud.
And that is the exact question the AI sources wrestle with.
Yeah.
It brings us to the core legal mechanism that gives the tenant all his power here. Arglistige Täuschung.
Which translates to fraudulent misrepresentation, right?
Yeah, exactly. In German civil law, to prove this, you don't necessarily have to prove that the landlord sat in a dark room twirling his mustache, plotting to burn the tenant alive.
Okay, so what do you actually have to prove?
You have to prove that the landlord either knew about a severe defect or must have known based on their objective expertise and then deliberately withheld that information during the signing of the lease.
Ah, must have known. That's the catch.
Right. If a random amateur landlord wires an apartment and leaves 20 cables exposed, a judge might look at them and say, well, they're an idiot, but they didn't know it was a death trap. They just lacked the knowledge.
They were just incompetent, not malicious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the Master Electrician's title completely removes the defense of stupidity.
Because he literally has a degree in knowing better.
Precisely. To hold an Electromeister title, you must pass rigorous state exams specifically on these VDE safety norms.
So he can't say he didn't know.
He cannot legally claim, oh, I didn't know mixing cross-sections causes fires. The law views it as, you knew it, you built it anyway, and you handed the keys to a tenant without warning them. That is the exact legal threshold for deceit.
But wait, the lease isn't even with the husband. The lease is with the wife. She's the landlady on paper.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Right, because if she doesn't know anything about electricity, how does the husband's title legally bind her?
It happens through a fascinating mechanism in the German Civil Code called Wissenszurechnung.
Wissenszurechnung. And that translates to imputed knowledge.
Yes. Think of it like a shared legal cloud drive between two people.
Okay, I like that analogy. How does the sync work between them?
If the landlady uses her husband as her agent, so he's acting as her property manager and her installer, he becomes her Erfüllungsgehilfe.
Her vicarious agent.
Right. And the law says that any highly specialized knowledge he acquires or possesses while acting on her behalf automatically syncs to her legal folder.
So she can't just claim ignorance.
She cannot hide behind the corporate veil of the lease. His knowledge is imputed to her. Therefore, the landlord, as a single entity, knowingly rented out a lethal space.
They share a legal hard drive, and the file labeled "We built a death trap" is just sitting right there on both their desktops.
Exactly. And once you establish Arglistige Täuschung, that fraudulent misrepresentation, it acts as an absolute wrecking ball to standard contract law.
How so?
Well, normally a commercial lease has all sorts of clauses protecting the landlord. Things like rented as seen, strict limits on liability, strict statutes of limitation on reporting defects.
Standard boilerplate stuff.
Right. But deceit incinerates all of those protections. They just vanish.
And the sources mention this puts the landlord's building insurance in the crosshairs, too?
Oh, completely. Put yourself in the shoes of an insurance investigator for a second.
Okay.
A building burns down. You sift through the ashes and you find an 18-kilowatt heater wired to a 25-amp fuse with mixed cables.
You'd be suspicious.
Very. Then you find out the landlord's husband, a literal master electrician, did the work.
They would flip.
You don't just deny the claim. You void the entire policy for gross negligence, possibly even conditional intent.
So the insurance company just walks away.
They walk away entirely, leaving the landlord personally liable for the millions of euros in structural damage, plus the tenant's destroyed inventory, plus, God forbid, potential wrongful death suits.
That is just terrifying leverage. The landlord is essentially standing on a financial trapdoor.
They are.
But here is the pivot in the whole stratagem. The tenant doesn't just run out to a lawyer and file a lawsuit.
Which is what most people would do.
Right. But he realizes that a civil suit will take years. It will cost tens of thousands in expert witness fees up front just to get started.
And he'd probably have to vacate his showroom during the trial, effectively killing his entire business.
So instead of all that, he turns to the AI to help him draft a highly calculated, surgically precise letter directed to the husband.
And the goal of this letter, according to the documents, is to present that moral offer we talked about.
Right, the moral offer. The tenant basically wants to say, look, I have the evidence to end your career, void your insurance, and potentially put you in prison for construction endangerment.
Heavy stuff.
But if you do a full renovation and give me a retroactive 50% rent reduction for the past 9 years, I won't go to the authorities.
Which, I mean, that triggers immediate massive warning bells from the AI legal models.
I would hope so.
Because linking a civil demand, asking for a 50% rent reduction to the threat of criminal prosecution is the textbook definition of coercion.
Under Section 240 of the German Criminal Code, right?
Yes, or even extortion under Section 253.
So if I'm the tenant and I write, pay me 50 grand, or I'm calling the police about the wiring, I haven't just made a demand, I've actually committed a felony myself.
Yes, you have. The German courts take a very, very dim view of private citizens using the state's criminal justice system as a personal collection agency.
That makes total sense.
The threat of police intervention just cannot be used as leverage to extract money, even if the person legitimately owes you the money.
It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? You have this loaded gun, the literal evidence of their criminal negligence, but if you point it at them and ask for your wallet back, you become the criminal.
It's a legal minefield.
So how do the AI models advise the tenant to actually thread this needle? How do you leverage the threat without making it a threat?
The sources outline this psychological framing tactic that is often referred to in negotiation theory as building a golden bridge.
A golden bridge, I like that.
You don't corner your opponent.
Yeah.
You build a golden bridge for them to retreat across, making it seem like it's their own idea to walk over it.
Okay, but how does that translate to the actual literal text of the letter?
First, you meticulously document the facts. You list the danger, the specific VDE violations, and the husband's personal liability.
So you establish the reality of the situation.
Yes, and then you separate the civil issue from the criminal issue entirely.
Yeah.
You frame your silence not as something you are selling, but as a temporary gracious delay.
Like, I have severe legal claims, and the authorities would be very interested in this. However, I value our 9-year relationship, and I am choosing to give you a brief window to rectify this mistake privately before I am forced to escalate.
Exactly. That framing is so crucial. You position yourself as the rational, benevolent actor who is actively trying to save the husband from his own mess.
You're doing him a favor.
The letter suggested by the AI models explicitly uses phrases like, I have no interest in escalating this to a formal dispute, and I want to offer you the opportunity to solve this professionally and without noise.
Wow.
It's not, pay me or else. It's, I am holding the authorities off for a few days so we can figure this out between us.
It is a masterclass in passive-aggressive legal phrasing.
It really is.
And when we look at the anatomy of this letter, the specific structural elements the AI recommends it gets even more Machiavellian. Because the tenant doesn't send this letter to the landlady.
No, he addresses it directly to the husband.
Which is such a specific choice.
And this is where the strategy shifts from legal theory to pure psychological warfare. By addressing the husband, the tenant deliberately bypasses the formal landlord-tenant dynamic. He ignores the contract and attacks the tort.
Okay, explain the difference there in this context. Contract versus tort.
The contract is the lease itself. The wife holds the lease. If the tenant breaches the lease, she sues him. If the building is defective, he sues her. That's contract law.
Pretty straightforward.
Right. But a tort is a civil wrong that causes harm. The husband committed the tort. He's the one who actually wired the death trap.
So the tenant is basically saying, look, I'm not talking to the landlord right now. I'm talking to the guy who almost killed me.
Exactly. And the letter proves it by listing the highly specific VDE norm violations.
Showing he knows his stuff.
Right, tells the husband, I'm not a layman complaining about a flickering light. I have a professional electrical report. I know exactly what you did, and I know that you know what you did.
Which sets up the most brilliant and, frankly, the most devious piece of advice the AI gives the tenant.
The wedge strategy.
Yes. The letter must explicitly advise the husband to seek his own independent legal counsel, entirely separate from his wife's lawyer.
It's so smart.
But when I first read this in the sources, my immediate reaction was, why on earth would you tell your opponent to go get a lawyer? Doesn't that just make it harder to bully them into a settlement?
If it were just a standard contract dispute, yes, absolutely. But remember, the tort liability. Let's play this out.
Okay.
Let's imagine the husband ignores the advice and just hands the letter to his wife's lawyer. The wife's lawyer is hired to protect her rental income and her asset.
Right, the lawyer's allegiance is to her.
Exactly. That lawyer might say, don't pay him 50%, let's fight him in court, we can drag this out for years.
Because the wife isn't the one facing actual prison time?
Precisely. But now imagine the husband takes the tenant's advice. He walks into the office of an independent criminal defense attorney. He slides that terrifying electrician's report across the desk. What does that lawyer see?
They don't care about the rent money at all. They see the 20 exposed wires. They see the Master Electrician title. They see Bürgerförderung.
The defense attorney will look at the husband and say, if this goes to court, your wife might lose some rent money, but you are going to lose your master title.
Your livelihood.
You are going to face personal financial ruin if the insurance voids the policy. You could face actual criminal charges. The attorney will recognize a massive, glaring conflict of interest between the husband and the wife.
Oh, wow. So the defense attorney will literally turn to the husband and say, you need to do whatever this tenant wants. Immediately.
Yes. The tenant has essentially recruited the husband's own lawyer to be his advocate.
That is insane.
The husband goes home absolutely terrified of losing his livelihood and his freedom, and he has to plead with his own wife. He has to say, honey, we have to pay this guy the 50% reduction. We have to renovate the building. If we don't, I'm destroyed.
That is an absolute legal checkmate. The tenant doesn't even have to fight the landlady. He makes the husband fight her for him.
It's brilliant.
But to force that confrontation, the AI notes that the letter needs one final crucial ingredient: a firm, aggressive deadline, 10 to 14 days.
You cannot give them time to let the panic subside. You have to force an immediate crisis response.
Because if they relax, they might think of a way out.
Exactly. If you give them a month, they will find experts to try and mitigate the damage. 14 days forces the husband to scramble, consult a lawyer, and realize the depth of the trap he is in.
But speaking of deadlines, as brilliant as this whole strategy is, the sources reveal a massive ticking clock hanging over the tenant's own head.
And it's not a clock he controls.
No, it's a clock built into the foundation of the German Civil Code, Section 124 of the BGB.
And this is where the timeline of the lease becomes so incredibly critical. If you are going to challenge a contract based on deceit, which, remember, is the only way to bypass the standard landlord protections, you're racing against two entirely separate statutory clocks.
And the rule is basically you lose the moment the first clock runs out.
Exactly.
Okay, let's look at the dates again. The tenant signed the lease and moved in on April 1st, 2017. He lived there, blissfully unaware of the danger, for 9 whole years.
9 years of sleeping under a death trap.
Right. And then the fuse blew, and he received the damning electrical report on June 1st, 2026. Walk me through the two clocks based on those dates.
Okay, the first clock is the relative deadline. Section 124 states that you have exactly 1 year to formally challenge the contract, starting from the moment you actually discover the deceit.
So he discovers it on June 1st, 2026. The relative deadline gives him until June 1st, 2027, a full year. That seems like plenty of time to negotiate a settlement, even if they drag their feet a little.
It does seem like it, but then you have to calculate the absolute deadline. The law states that regardless of when you discover the fraud, your right to challenge the contract completely expires exactly 10 years from the day the contract was signed.
Oh, wow. The lease was signed on April 1st, 2017. 10 years is April 1st, 2027.
Yes. The absolute deadline of April 2027 arrives 2 months before the relative deadline of June 2027.
So the absolute deadline wins.
It always wins. The tenant doesn't have a full year. He has roughly 10 months from the day he found the bad wiring to finalize this entire dispute.
But wait, if he sends the letter in June 2026, doesn't that pause the clock? Can't he just say, hey, we are in negotiations, the clock is frozen?
Absolutely not. And this is a common and often fatal misconception in legal disputes.
Really?
Yeah. Informal emails, angry letters, and moral offers do not pause the statute of limitations. The German legal term is Hemmung, the suspension of the statute.
So how do you actually trigger HEMOM?
To trigger a suspension, you generally have to file a formal lawsuit, apply for a judicial dunning procedure, or enter into highly formalized, documented settlement negotiations where both parties legally acknowledge they're negotiating the core claim.
Which means if the landlord just ignores the 14-day deadline in the letter, or plays dumb and strings the tenant along with vague promises for a few months, the tenant could literally run out of time and lose all his leverage.
That is exactly the danger. The 14-day deadline isn't just a pressure tactic, it's a survival mechanism.
Wow.
If the 14 days pass without a concrete, legally binding acknowledgement from the landlord, the tenant really has no choice. The moral offer fails, and he must immediately hire a lawyer and file a lawsuit to freeze the clock before April 2027.
Let's talk about what happens if it actually goes to court, because the AI mentions this nuclear option, Anfechtung, or the formal annulment of the contract due to deceit.
It is the absolute nuclear button.
If the tenant successfully argues this in front of a judge, what does the fallout actually look like?
Annulment is a fascinating legal fiction. If the judge grants the Anfechtung, the law treats the 9-year commercial lease as if it literally never existed.
Never existed.
It is retroactively erased from reality.
Okay, if the lease never existed, then the tenant never legally owed rent. So does he get all 9 years of rent back in one massive lump sum?
In theory, yes. But this is where you enter the absolute mathematical nightmare of unjust enrichment laws.
Unjust enrichment.
Yeah, because while the tenant gets his rent back, the landlord also has a claim. The landlord can say, wait a minute, the contract never existed, which means this guy lived in my building for 9 years for free. He owes me compensation for the value of use.
How do you even calculate the value of use for a death trap? Do you argue that living in a fire hazard has a value of 0? Or does the judge say, well, the roof didn't leak and the lights technically turned on, so you owe 80% of market rate?
Exactly. It requires dueling expert witnesses, endless legal fees, and years of court battles to calculate a hypothetical fair market value for a dangerously wired apartment.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. But worse than the math is the physical reality. If the contract never existed, the tenant currently has no legal right to be in the building.
Oh, he's effectively a squatter.
Yes. The landlord could demand immediate eviction.
But it would be catastrophic.
For a lighting designer who has spent 9 years building a public showroom, installing custom fixtures, and establishing a geographic footprint for his business, losing the location overnight is usually fatal.
Which brilliantly eliminates why the out-of-court settlement is the only logical path. Going nuclear in court might win you a moral victory, but you lose your business.
Exactly.
The settlement lets you keep the location, forces the landlord to fix the wiring, and extracts a financial penalty.
It is the ultimate pragmatic solution. You wield the nuclear launch codes, the threat of Anfechtung and criminal charges, solely to force them to the negotiating table.
And the opening bid at that table is staggering. The tenant is demanding a 50% retroactive rent reduction for 9 years.
Which is huge.
For a commercial space with a showroom and an apartment, we are easily talking about a 6-figure sum.
It is wildly ambitious. The AI sources immediately flag a major legal hurdle here called Verwirkung, or forfeiture.
Forfeiture.
There is a principle in German law that essentially says, use it or lose it. If you live in an apartment for 9 years and pay your rent in full without any reservation every single month, courts will often argue that you have forfeited your right to suddenly demand half of it back.
Even if he didn't know the wiring was a death trap, how can you forfeit the right to complain about something you couldn't even see?
The landlord's lawyer will argue that the tenant should have noticed something was wrong over 9 years, or that allowing a massive retroactive claim violates the principle of legal certainty and trust in ongoing contracts.
So they basically say, it's too late to complain now.
Right. It's a very strong defense.
But the sources reveal that the tenant has a hidden ace up his sleeve. A force multiplier, they call it.
This changes everything.
He tells the AI that the electrical nightmare isn't actually the only issue. He actually has documented evidence of 2 other completely separate, previously undisclosed defects committed by the landlord that also fulfill the criteria for fraudulent misrepresentation.
And that changes the entire calculus of the negotiation.
How so?
If it was just the electrical panel, the landlord's lawyer might successfully argue the one mistake defense. They might say, my client's a master electrician. Yes, but he had a bad day. He was rushed. It was a negligent oversight, not malicious deceit.
You can explain away one anomaly, but 3.
Exactly. 3 separate, concealed defects establish a definitive pattern of behavior. It moves the needle from negligent mistake to systematic, calculated fraud.
It paints a picture.
It absolutely destroys the landlord's ability to play the victim in front of a judge.
So if the tenant has this force multiplier and he's demanding 50%, does he actually expect the landlord to write him a check for 100,000 euros?
No, and that's the beauty of anchoring in negotiation psychology.
Anchoring.
The tenant doesn't want to go to court for 50%. The tenant wants to drop a 50% anchor on the table to utterly terrify the landlord.
You make them stare at personal bankruptcy?
Yes. You let them sweat over that six-figure number.
Yeah.
You let the husband's defense attorney explain how devastating a trial will be. And then, right when they are at the absolute brink of despair, you offer a concession.
So what's the concession?
The tenant might say, okay, I don't want to bankrupt you. Instead of paying me back for the last 9 years, just pay for a fully certified commercial electrician to completely rewire the building and give me 6 months of free rent moving forward.
And the landlord, who is just facing a six-figure clawback, a voided insurance policy, and a criminal probe, looks at the cost of a renovation and 6 months' rent, and they feel like they just won the lottery.
Precisely. The realistic demand is perceived as a massive act of mercy.
That is so manipulative, but so effective.
And we have to remember, the tenant has his own urgent timeline here, driven by his own insurance.
Right, the commercial inventory insurance. The tenant designs custom, high-end lighting fixtures. His showroom is full of his livelihood.
When the fuse blew on June 1st and the electrician told him the building was a fire hazard, his legal status fundamentally changed. He now possesses positive knowledge of a critical risk.
Meaning he can't pretend he doesn't know.
Right. If he stays open for business, keeps the power on, and a fire breaks out tomorrow, destroying his inventory, his own insurance company will ask for the electrician's report.
And they'll see the date. You knew on June 1st it was a death trap, and you didn't force a fix or shut down the power. Claim denied due to gross negligence.
Exactly. The tenant is fighting a war on 3 fronts. He has to beat the 10-year statutory clock. He has to manage the psychological warfare with the husband to force a settlement. And he has to get the physical wiring fixed immediately so his own insurance doesn't drop him.
It is a battle for absolute survival.
It really is.
It is incredible to pull back and look at the sheer scope of this journey. I mean, it all started with one mundane event. A guy is sleeping, a fuse blows, and he calls an electrician.
And that one tiny thread unraveled a massive, deadly DIY nightmare.
And it evolves as this masterful demonstration of how to navigate the absolute limits of civil and criminal law, using a master electrician's own title as a weapon against him.
Engineering a conflict of interest between a husband and wife by advising him to get a lawyer.
Threading the needle of a moral offer to avoid extortion.
The overarching lesson here is profound. Having the law on your side is completely insufficient.
It's not enough to just be right.
No. Knowing that the wiring is legal and knowing that the landlord is liable doesn't automatically fix your building or get your money back.
Knowledge is only power when it is applied through strategy.
You have to understand the mechanics of liability. You have to understand the ticking clocks of the statutes. And most importantly, you have to understand the human elements of fear and leverage.
The tenant's genius wasn't just knowing he was wronged. It was knowing who to write the letter to and how to frame his silence as a golden bridge rather than a threat.
It fundamentally changes how you look at the world around you.
It really does. We rely so heavily on the social contract. We see a credential, a master electrician, a certified mechanic, a doctor, and we just assume safety.
We assume the system works. We assume the X-ray is clear.
We have to. Otherwise, modern society grinds to a halt.
Yeah.
We can't all inspect the wiring in every building we enter.
But this deep dive makes you wonder. If a master electrician is willing to wire a 24-kilowatt heater to a 25-amp fuse and hide an FI switch above a drop ceiling in his own property,
what hidden, dangerous defects are currently sitting behind the walls of your own life, signed off by an expert who thought nobody would ever check their work?
It's a chilling thought to leave on. The illusion of safety is just that, an illusion until tested.
It really is. Until next time, keep asking questions and maybe, just maybe, double-check your fuse box.